Hello and welcome to Sustainapod, the podcast produced for young people by young people about the world of sustainability. My name is Paco. I'm the executive producer of Sustainapod and an undergraduate student at Imperial College London. And today we have Antoinette. So,
Hi.
you good?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you, Paco. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you give yourself like a bit of an introduction to who you are and what you're doing?
Sure. So my name is Antoniette Oni. I'm an architectural designer by training, but I'm also the founder of Agrica Build. We're a pioneering team that's creating construction materials from crop waste, agricultural waste. And through this, we're able to envision a net zero future by creating a carbon sink from utilizing waste that would otherwise end up in landfill or incinerated, whilst also addressing some of the issues with the UK housing stock. So, yeah, that's us.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's a very cool story. Obviously, I met you through the pre-accelerator, and that's how I met Katya as well, who I interviewed last week.
Nice. Oh,
Um,
amazing.
so yeah, I mean, just thinking, let's go all the way back. Let's go to how did you get into this green space? How did you get into like the sustainability space, and what have you learned from that?
So yeah, it was sort of by accident. So part of my childhood, I grew up on a farm. So I grew up sort of connected to the land, growing different crops, maize, etc. And um, but then coming into adulthood, I left that completely behind, living in cities. And for me, studying architecture, I felt really disconnected from the profession. I felt like it was removed from actual communities and real world problems. It was sort of discussed always in like a very theory heavy, inaccessible way. So, coming out of undergraduate, I then volunteered for an NGO that specifically helped widowed women to hold on to their land rights. This is in West Africa because in some cultures there's a issue of a woman loses her husband and then his family would actually kick her off their land. Meanwhile, in a lot of those countries, it's actually illegal, but then it's culturally accepted. So just understanding the law, but also part of the work there was teaching regenerative agricultural practices as well. So there's sort of threads throughout my career. So going back into doing my master's at UAL, there was a real heavy emphasis on a sustainable and regenerative future within the built environment. So I studied with material cultures. They are sort of leading um, the material revolution in terms of hempcrete and hemp board, so hemp-based construction materials. But always felt that there was a bit of a gap there because hemp, you need to grow it. It's a commodity crop. So I was always sort of imagining what biomass is already existing that we could utilize in the same way. And yeah, essentially, I fell into it by accident because I saw all the issues with regards to the climate crisis and the environmental breakdown. And to me, some of the solutions or answers just seemed really obvious, but then they weren't being uh, tackled or confronted. So that's what I've dedicated my career and my
Yeah,
life to doing. So yeah,
there
long
are two
story.
things that you said in there actually. Like, one thing that you said was you felt that when you got into university, when you were studying architecture, that you kind of lost touch with like the real world.
Yeah.
Could you kind of talk a bit about that? Because I feel like a lot of our audience is like secondary school uni students, and so it's very easy for us to lose touch with like the real world when we're doing these theoretical subjects, and most of the time we don't actually get on-site experience. So
Yeah.
could you give a bit more insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate my education. It gave me a fantastic grounding and foundation. I will say that. But maybe because it was also at an elite university, it just felt very removed from community. It felt very removed from some of the pressing issues. And I mean, architecture school, it's a wild ride. I mean, the whole stereotype of like wearing black and everyone's dressed in it and you work crazy hours. I'm not sure if it's still like that now, but that was definitely the way it was then. It was like a cult of personality. And yeah, I just it I felt like I wasn't in the real world, and I wanted to be in the real world. So I took quite a long gap in between undergrad and masters, and I worked different jobs. I traveled. You know, found my passion, and that just so happened to be helping communities. And what a lot of communities are dealing with is issues and consequences of climate change and environmental breakdown. So that's essentially how it happened. It was just like finding what I was passionate about, finding some of the bigger issues, and it just so happens to be the environment. So yeah.
Yeah. I think you touched on a good point there, but basically saying that um, to learn more about the environment, to get more in touch with the environment, you actually have to touch grass. Like
Yeah.
you actually have to go outside and see like what it's actually like. And for you, that was farming, and
Yeah,
because you
for
had
sure.
access to that, is there anything else that you would want to add to, like, let's say that there was a student who wants to know more about sustainability but doesn't know enough or doesn't feel like they have access to that, like how what other things could they do at secondary school, university, to try to like get themselves into this space?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely connect with local community groups. It doesn't necessarily have to be like activist groups. It could also be maybe local authorities as well. Different community groups, community gardens as well. There's a lot in that space. There's also a lot of online resources as well. I mean, Sustainapod is a really obvious one. But look at what's pressing, I would say, in your local community, because chances are there's already people doing the work, maybe through school, maybe through your local place of worship, like a church or mosque. Chances are they're already doing something to grapple with the environmental crisis, and it might not be so obvious. It might be a thing of food security, or maybe a thing of retrofitting homes to make them more energy efficient. I feel like sometimes the approach towards the environmental issues can sometimes not be so the connection might not be so explicit, but the rising cost of living, of the cost of food, is all a consequence of this. So chances are communities are already dealing with it in a way, but it may not be so obvious. So volunteer at a local soup kitchen. Chances are that they're already dealing with the consequences of the climate crisis, and you can help with that. Local food garden, you know, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And so going back to your story, for you that was farm waste,
Yeah.
and dealing with a farm and seeing how, like, seeing that firsthand. Why is food waste, I mean farm waste, such a big problem? And can you explain more about how that is a problem?
Yeah, so after plastic, wheat straw is the most abundant agricultural waste in the UK. I mean, wheat is in everything, nearly everything that we eat: pasta, rice, crackers, just majority of the British food staple diet is made up of wheat. And in other nations, for example, it's rice, but that also generates a lot of straw as well. So this problem is it cuts across. And due to so traditionally farmers would openly incinerate the wheat straw on the field once they're done with the harvest. But obviously, with incoming green regulations, they get sort of penalized for doing this practice. So they now have to pay waste disposal companies to collect the waste wheat straw. But then a
Yeah,
good percentage of that ends up in landfill anyway. So it's kind of like pushing the problem around and not really confronting it. So we've seen a huge opportunity to utilize this biomass to create materials that could actually confront and decarbonize another aspect, which is the built environment. So we manufacture a thermal wall cavity insulation. So this is what you would install in walls and in lofts, in homes, to make them more energy efficient so that they can stay warmer and perform much better, using less heat, and therefore decarbonizing also the housing stock as well. Because again, the UK has some of the worst performing when it comes to energy efficiency housing stock in Western Europe. and we really need to tackle it. There's a whole myriad of issues. I can go into it all day: mold,
Oh yeah.
different respiratory diseases that residents are having to grapple with, the impact on the NHS as well, and on public health. There's it's just so many parts in motion. So we've definitely we're definitely tapping into this, and sorry to go on, but we're putting the user, both the end user, which are residents, but also our farming benefactors at the heart of our company as well. Because at the end of the day, it's, for me, sustainability doesn't really mean anything if it's not centered around those who are most affected, which are community members, human and non-human community members. So farmers, residents, but then also biodiversity as well, which is heavily impacted by landfill. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I think with a lot of, especially in the UK, there are a lot of houses that are not standard in terms of their cladding and their insulation. So
yeah,
something that is using basically material that would go into wasteland anyway, and for you to use that material to build insulation to maybe get these houses to standard would mean a lot.
yeah.
Just wondering, like this is on a personal level, but then do you think you guys would be installing the insulation like on top of like the current buildings, like with like around the current buildings, or do you have to take things down? Because obviously, I asked that because it's obviously best to recycle materials, but then even better than that is to reduce having to break things down
Yeah,
and
for
and
sure.
of the sort. So, what is like the method of installing this insulation?
So currently we produce insulation bats. So they're boards that can be fitted into the wall cavity. But we're also developing a fill-in version. So that would be more appropriate for retrofit. So upgrading existing buildings. So what you would do for that is essentially drill a hole in an existing wall, put a tube into that, and then blow in the soft material until it fills up
Right.
the wall cavity. So that's the way of doing it. Currently, what is used is spray foam insulation, but this is derived from petrochemicals. It's also incredibly dangerous if the two compounds don't mix properly,
Right.
and actually causes a lot of off gassing. So there's compounds called volatile organic compounds, and these have been connected with cancer, different respiratory diseases, and yeah, it's just not great. So we're trying to compete with this product, and essentially give the market a better alternative, give consumers a better alternative that they can use for new builds, but also for retrofit as well.
Absolutely. And competition, friendly competition is always encouraged. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just what helps everyone get
yeah,
better.
and giving customers choice as well, because currently on the market there's not a lot of bio-based insulation available. And if there is, a lot of it's hemp-based, which again, I can go into the environmental impacts of
Yeah.
that. Hemp relies on monocropping, also it relies on pesticide use, and it's a very expensive plant. So we're giving our consumers a choice. It doesn't just have to be petrochemical polymer-based insulation or just hemp-based. You can actually have this, yeah,
Yeah.
wheat straw
So
based.
this idea, was that your idea initially, or was it all four of you guys sitting down and then thinking that through?
So yeah, I mean, I came in with the idea of utilizing agricultural waste for construction. So a lot of my individual research through my master's program, but also in the work that I did as a consultant, a regenerative design consultant, over the past few years, fed into this. So I came with an existing body of knowledge. A lot of my knowledge actually was centered around the tropics and different tropical plants that could be utilized. So when we came together as a team, we then came up with the idea of what was confronting a British issue, or an issue specifically within the Western European climate. So wheat straw again is the most abundant waste byproduct here. Um, and thermal insulation again is a problem very much tied to this climate. So that's what we developed together as a team. And then we have our inventor, who's part of our co-founding team, and his research over a 4-year PhD is our flagship product, the wheat straw based insulation. So it currently already works as a acoustic panel, and we've developed on top of that existing technology to make it a thermal wall cavity insulation.
Yeah. And that's really, really cool because we should actually explain that if you guys didn't watch our interview with Katia, that the Climate Pre-Accelerator was basically a pre-accelerated program from the Climate Entrepreneurship Club at
Yeah,
Imperial. And it featured a lot of different schools like Imperial, UAL,
yeah.
and a bunch of different unis around the world. So yeah, it was how did you guys meet? Was that through the networking experience or did you guys know beforehand? And then you already talked about like how you guys came with the idea, but then do you have any like funny stories or like interesting stories about the building process as well?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we met through the Climate Entrepreneurs Club networking event. It was actually the first day I turned up. I met like each of my co-founders. It was really insane. It was like the stars definitely aligned on that. Um, and yeah, so Melin, Han Meng, yeah, fantastic team. And we just really hit it off. And there was definitely a shared passion for the environment and also material innovation. So Melin has worked for years now with farmers, specifically in Vietnam and across Southeast Asia, to help them create more value along the supply chain. And she's worked in manufacturing. So that was already a great connection there. We both had a passion for empowering farmers because they really do get a raw deal across different countries and societies. The people who grow our food, typically, it's really not an easy industry. And we just felt that they were often bearing the brunt of a lot of environmental policies that were actually supposed to help in the long run. But if you just place them without support, it's really detrimental to the livelihoods of farmers. So we immediately connected over that. And also one thing we had in common as well is that we both grew up on a farm in our childhood
Yeah.
and then both forgot as well. Like it's just like a distant memory. So we definitely connected over that. And then also because she had like a background in also social entrepreneurship as well, and I'd worked in NGOs, she had worked in NGOs, so we connected over that as well, and working with communities. And with Hanming, I mean, he's just so incredibly knowledgeable about materials. So he's incredibly humble as well. So he actually won an international competition where he developed cement mix that was lowering carbon emissions utilizing agricultural waste, so rice husk ash. He came up with and won that competition. And yeah, immediately connected over that. Our passion for materials, for the built environment. He has a background in civil engineering. I have a background in architecture. So immediately connected over that. And also I come from a family of civil engineers. So both
Wow.
my grandparents on both sides are civil engineers. And I remember being a kid getting dragged to construction sites and being like, oh my gosh, grandpa, what is this? Why am I here? But then actually looking back, that's what led to me entering the construction industry. So again,
Right.
Hanming and I definitely bonded over that. And yeah, we just made a really great team, worked incredibly well together. And I'm really grateful for Imperial creating that environment, because if I'm not mistaken, this year's Climate Entrepreneurs Club was the first time they opened it up to non-Imperial students, graduates, and alum, if I'm not mistaken.
I think
Um,
I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
Maylin is a master's student at the London Interdisciplinary School, and sorry, and myself, I'm a graduate of UAL, University Arts London. So where else would we have been able to meet? I can't imagine. So I'm really grateful that Imperial facilitated that and created these connections. yeah, and then we ended up winning, which is incredible. Like a graduate of an arts university winning like a competition at Imperial was just like really, really surreal. So yeah, I'm
Yeah,
really
for sure.
grateful.
And it was well deserved as well. Like I feel like because I don't know if you noticed, but I am a civil engineering student, so Han Ming
Yeah,
is actually
yeah.
like
He
someone I
told
could
me.
see on a regular basis.
Yeah, he
But
told me. Yeah,
I wouldn't know that. Like I feel like maybe this shouldn't be just an imperial thing, but if you just look around at the people around you, you might not feel like they do much, or like you won't know what they do until you have a real conversation with them.
yeah,
And just to like tie into maybe like someone that is listening to this podcast, like really anyone around you could have some interesting story that resonates with you that you could work with them on, and you wouldn't know that unless you go out and talk to them.
yeah.
So it's really about trying to find these opportunities for yourself, but at the same time just taking a look around and talking to people.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And finding community, which links back to my earlier point. Like, if there's any young people out there, you're looking around and you see some of the issues, just find community, find, yeah, who shares these interests. It may be in the most unusual places, but chances are you're not the only one who is passionate about the environment or is passionate about, envisioning a better world. Food security, uh, ending fuel poverty, for example, and just find those because you never know what may come of those connections. You could always form a podcast together or form a business or, embark on some great project together or just, again, opening something as simple as opening a garden and managing that and running that. There's so many opportunities, but it's connecting with other people and envisioning together.
Yeah. And another thing that I would say is when you set out on one opportunity, that gives you more connections. Like when you try to do something to a certain extent, for example, Sustainapod wasn't started in the pre-accelerator, but it was something that I decided to bring so that we could expand it further. But through there, I was able to meet you, meet Katia, and be like all the other contestants. And that in of itself was like a different experience that I wouldn't have been able to have. So it's just about opening up your eyes and just like trying new things and then seeing
Yeah.
where it leads you, because you never know, like with these things.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure, for
yeah,
sure. Yeah,
I think that really ties in because so after all the different like stages, you went to the pitch, and then you guys actually brought, if I'm not mistaken, you guys actually brought like the bio
the
block.
straw bale. Yeah, so we bought
Yeah.
the straw bale. So our IP lawyers advised us not to showcase our product just because it
Okay.
would complicate the process, which we filed now. So that's all done and dusted, thank goodness. So instead, we brought the actual raw material, which is the straw bale. So again, throughout our process of research, we met with different agricultural workers, construction companies, architects, etc. And one of the farmers that we met with, he processes straw bales and sells them to different clients. He has like M&S sometimes if they want to do like a Christmas or Easter display, we'll just like buy a bunch of bales from him or weddings. And he actually already sells to construction companies as well, but they use it more so to control pollution. So they create temporary walls with the straw bales to mop up sort of residues that are generated on construction sites. So he was more than eager to give us. He literally gave us the bales for free. And so I had to carry this because obviously parking in central London is a nightmare. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to drive all that way. So I literally had to carry these straw bales on the London tube and like bring them to the Royal Institution. And, but it was worth it. I put them in a suitcase.
Yeah.
Um, and, and brought it along. And when we had feedback from the judges afterwards, they were like, yeah, that pretty much sealed the deal because they were able to get that real look and feel of the problem, which is this abundance of waste material that farmers just can't get rid of. They can't get rid of it fast enough. And they are actually willing to give it away for free because it's such a problem for them. And that's our raw material. So sourcing that and having that really tactile prop essentially available right there really sort of drove the point home.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
worth the stressful tube journey.
100%, especially winning as well. That's that that's also something.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously you won, and I don't know about most of the different contestants, but I'm assuming that not a lot of them actually have went to the stage that you're at, where you guys are actually a startup. You guys are actually fulfilling it, trying new things. I saw that you guys moved into a new workspace a month or two ago. So how was that experience like being a startup founder essentially?
Yeah, I mean, it happened so fast. So the work that we were doing, I've essentially been doing as a consultant for the past few years, but that was always very client focused. So for us now to have launched a company incorporated, dealing with, the bureaucracy of it all, but also the really enjoyable parts, like moving into Somerset House and getting workspace at Makerversity, um, establishing our farm as well up in Cheshire. It's been really surreal. But then this is, I kind of look back at my career and I see the threads of it already. But it's just that essentially building this team was what propelled it to the next level.
Yeah.
So yeah, things are really fast moving, but essentially the seeds were, sorry for the pun, the very obvious pun, but the seeds were planted a long time ago, but we're just now seeing the harvest of it. so, so yeah, things are
Yeah.
fast moving, which is great.
How is how is that experience? I mean, you have commented on what that experience is like, but I think something that we're trying to do at Sustainapod is we're trying to make the the weird jobs seem less weird. Because like normally you would think about going into a job as like engineer, lawyer, doctor, consultant, for example, but then it's it's more about thing that like you could be a researcher in this field or you could be a startup founder, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're
Mm.
passionate about it and you have something that you want to give to society. um how how has that experience been like? Because and what would you say to someone who kind of doesn't know where they're going and doesn't know if being a part of a startup is their thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because I do believe traditional professions have a place in the startup ecosystem, let's say, and in sustainable careers. So, for example, we will need lawyers, and we do need lawyers within the sustainability space. There's so much there, and there's some really great law firms out there who are actually advocating on behalf of the environment and really sort of utilizing their skills and knowledge. So, I would say, like, to young people who are maybe looking at traditional career paths versus sustainable career paths, I would say to me they're one in the same. We actually need to converge the two because all the skill set and that would be generated from a traditional career path, an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer, for example, we need those skills. But we need a rethinking and a refreshing of what those careers look like to achieve a sustainable net zero future. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But I
It
wouldn't
does, it
be where
does.
I am had I not studied and worked as an architectural designer, if that makes sense. And I know Hamming wouldn't be where he is had he not had that background in civil engineering, and Maylin wouldn't be where she is now had she not had that background in business. So we're essentially just bringing our existing skill set, but we have like a common goal, which is to achieve a net zero future.
Yeah, we actually talked to. Well, I actually talked to another Imperial graduated startup team called the Tire Collective. I'm not sure if you heard of them, um, but they've also were like UAL Imperial graduates, and they're also currently in their stages of a startup, and they're I think they did their crowdfunding at the beginning of this year, which was quite interesting.
Nice.
But when I asked one of their founders, so Hansen, he told me about how it's hard because within your team you want to be friends, Like obviously you have to have that friend hat. So what he told me, he was like, you have your friend hat and then you have like your work hat. Like they sometimes you have to like keep people accountable, but at the same time you guys want to be friends. So like sometimes he would say, okay, I need you to do this, but then like when it goes out to dinner, then like that hat is off. Like then you just put back your friend hat on. How has that experience been like for you? Because also for us, it's kind of been hard balancing between trying to be friends with everyone and trying to work with everyone. So how do you keep everyone accountable, but at the same time make sure everyone's doing the right thing?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I feel like I've really struck gold with my team. We get on like it's almost quite creepy. We get on so well. Like it's really strange. So, and I think also it's our personality types. Like our relationship is built on respect. It's built on very honest communication. So open and honest communication. So for me, I almost don't see a difference between our work relationship and our personal relationship. It's just one built on mutual respect, built on communication, built on honesty with one another, and so sort of I don't see that I feel like I don't have to change whether it's like during work hours or if we're at dinner together. Like now we're actually all gonna have a weekend away at the farm up in Cheshire as a team, and I'm really looking forward to it. But we're also going to work during that time as well, and meet with different farming partners. So I don't know. I can't say I resonate with with what the others have said. But yeah, I think just treating one another as you would like to be treated. For me, that's the foundation of it, of all good relationships, whether it be personal relationships or professional relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree. I mean, honest and open communication is definitely the most important thing.
Yeah.
Um, on top of that, though, I feel like you building the idea was great, pitching it was great, but then when you start to talk about, because you said you had lawyers as well, like with the IP lawyers and then like talking about copyright, trademarking, and stuff like that, has that been quite annoying for you recently, or how has
Um,
that process been like as well?
I would say the most annoying thing is taxes because I'm just like, why is it so unattained? Like, I literally don't get it. So now you've just handed over to an accountant. I was just like, I surrender. I can't do this. My hands are up. Because especially as a startup, you want to save as much money as you can. And,
Yeah,
we're like, oh, can we really afford to outsource this and hire this person for that? You don't really want to waste people's time. And also, you don't want to enter debt as well. So we're really managing our finances carefully. But then, we had to sit down. Mainly it's Mylan sitting me down and being like, we need to spend this money because it's costing us a lot of time. So the time that we're using to sort of decipher the tax landscape and bureaucracy of that, we could just outsource it, pay an accountant, and they would do it, in much quicker time, and then we can concentrate our efforts on actually building the business. So yeah, so we definitely sort of um, seeking the advice of seeking the help and assistance of different advisors in different landscapes is really and different fields is also really helped. Our IP lawyers, they're a fantastic team. They've been with us from the beginning. We actually connected with them through the Climate Entrepreneurs Club. And
oh,
they've really sort of held our hand through this process because, again, I come from an architectural background. I had little to no idea with how patenting worked, but they've
yeah,
really been incredibly generous. And thankfully, we're in this place where we're gainful as a startup, so we're able to pay them and pay them well for their work. So yeah, we're things are moving forward. Thank goodness.
yeah. What do you think about outsourcing? Obviously, Mylin had to sit you down for the accountant thing, but then kind of on a like on our side of things, like we don't know if we can outsource just because except for one of us, none of us are actually working, so we don't
Mm,
actually have our own income. So then to pay someone to outsource something like editing has been a dilemma for like ages now. And sometimes you just think about it like, well, that we're spending this much time is worth this much money to me, then why don't I give that time to someone else and pay someone else to do it who might be doing it better than us? So what are like your thoughts on outsourcing as a company and deciding what things to outsource, because not everything should be outsourced at the same time?
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to consider what your skill set is and what you can do quickly. So you really have to weigh it up and almost like on a granular level, like really look at the hours that you're putting in, how much those hours are costing versus if you were to just outsource it. So, for example, I studying architecture, I learned a lot of software, design software like Illustrator, Photoshop, etc. So things like our logo and our pitch deck, I just did it myself, and that took me probably an evening to really like sit down
Wow.
and do it. And yeah, I designed the logo in one day, but it took many iterations because I had to send them to the team and they were like, oh, we don't like that one. Okay, we like option 4. We like this one. I like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
part of option
Same.
3. Add it to option 5. Yeah. So again, so sort of whatever we could do in house in an efficient way, we're happy to do. But when it comes to things where our expertise are patchy, we could easily drop the ball on something, say, for example, taxes, and that could actually cost us a lot in the long run because you will get fined if you don't get it right. You
Yeah.
get penalties. Then that's something where you just have to be like, okay, I don't have the expertise right now. We're quite new to this. Let's get professional advice and let's, consider raising the funds to be able to pay for this service. And thankfully, a lot of different companies are really understanding of the startup struggle and landscape. Like, yes, we are tight for time and we're tight for cash right now. So they already provide services specifically tailored to startups and where we're at, which is great because then it's a lot more accessible for us, and yeah, we're able to grow in that. And maybe one day I'll be a tax expert and I'll be able to do it
Yeah.
myself. But in terms of growing the company and where we're at right now, it makes more than enough sense to outsource certain things that we just aren't experts on.
100%. I agree with you on that because our logo, that took about a month just because we had to figure out who was going to do it, who had time to do it, and then like going through iterations like option 1, option 2, option 3, just like what you guys did. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's really thinking about what's most efficient. Like if you have the expertise in it, then obviously you can go for it. But then if you feel like you're lacking in expertise, then that probably should be something that you outsource if the price is right,
Yeah.
and thinking about it in that way. So that now that you're in this field, right? So now you're actually in the green field, the sustainability field. Looking back to when you were younger, is there anything that you would have wanted at a younger age to be accessible to? So, for example, we're trying to build just a sustainable website, right? Is there
Yeah.
anything that you feel like when I was in secondary school, man, if I saw this on the web and like I could get to um, know someone, know something, or like interact, like that would have been so game changing for me. Like I would have known so much more and been interested in sustainability. Is there anything that you wish you had access to when you were younger?
Yeah, I think probably linking back again to my earlier point, communities, what existing communities are already working in that space in my local area, that would have been really helpful. Um, when I was growing up, the environmental question wasn't, the conversation wasn't that far along. I feel like a lot of it was based on like litter and sort of
Yeah.
more on an aesthetic level rather than like actually discussing deeper topics like landfill, con- uh, how much we consume as well, things like that. So I think just having access to those conversations, maybe different lectures that are available from experts, things that are accessible to a younger audience as well, would have been really interesting. Yeah, and maybe even like, for example, foraging. I've had sort of like a growing interest in foraging and how to actually live off the land and learn directly from it. So maybe like foraging walks and things like that. I feel like I could even maybe even do with that resource right now to find where things like that exist in my local area. Oh, another one as well is buying local produce. So I'm really interested in, so the area I live now is in Hertfordshire. And I visited a friend of mine and he had raw milk in his fridge. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And there's only two farmers in the entire county who sell raw milk. And the thing about raw milk is that it has so many nutritional benefits. And also it has lactase in it because it's not been pasteurized, so it still has lactase in it, which counters the lactose. So even a lactose intolerant person could consume this milk. Please consult your doctor first, but in theory, could still could consume this milk, and it has a
Yeah.
lot of nutritional benefits. So just finding resources like that, like where I could buy my bread locally, or my basic necessities locally, um, would definitely be really interesting, even to me now, as a young-ish person.
Yeah. No, no,
Yeah.
100%. You're still young. 100% though. I
Thank
feel
you.
like globalization and localization is not a problem that we're talking about enough. Obviously, um, you said that as a young person, like the environmental conversation was about litter. Now it's about ice cap melting, forest fires, tornadoes, like blah 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 blah. Oh, like deforestation. It's like
Huge
the
things.
typical huge
Yeah.
things. But then there are also like smaller things, like what you're doing with the insulation, what the Tire Collective
Yeah.
is doing with microplastics in tire wear. Um, like there are all these small conversations that people don't see, and there are students, like we've consulted some students before, and they said that some schools are actually like not promoting sustainable jobs, like disincentivizing people to go into these jobs just because they say it's like low pay or like it's not useful. um Even though I think climate change has been more and more apparent, um it's still hard to convince someone to care. Like if you ask a student, do you care about climate change? Oh yeah, of course I care about climate change, I know it exists. But then what do you do about it? Like there's not a lot of, there is a lot of talk about it, but then not everyone is going to say how they're going to act on it. Like not everyone's going to
Mm,
act on it. What do you
yeah.
think the problem is? Like why do not as many people want to act on it? And then what can we do about that?
Yeah. I think people probably just don't know how. And this was what became really obvious in my education as well, like undergrad versus masters. Undergrad, I learnt the basics and the fundamentals of architecture and the skills, right? Really, really helpful, good foundation. Again, like we can't throw the traditional careers in the bin. We actually need them. But then coming into my masters and then my following career, it's utilizing those skills to address the current problem, which is the environmental issue. So I'll give you an example. Say if you were to study medicine and you want to become a medical doctor, a lot of your patients are going to be impacted by the climate crisis. So, for example, public health, with regards to air pollution, there's growing issues of respiratory diseases, in poor indoor air quality. Children are being diagnosed with asthma and other illnesses. The elderly are also heavily impacted as well, and this is a direct consequence of climate change. So you can utilize your skills and your knowledge as a medical practitioner and directly impact and influence, whether it be policy or the way we administer healthcare, or creating a more robust healthcare system that is actually climate resilient and addressing the incoming and new challenges caused by environmental degradation. That's your connection, that's your way in right there. So we still need those traditional professions, we still need those skill sets and knowledge, but we need to apply it to the pressing issues right now, which is the environment. Because there's so many challenges. We need transport to be climate resilient, we need housing to be climate resilient, we need healthcare to be climate resilient, food systems to be climate resilient, our economy as well. We can't just go business as usual. So I would say take an interest in the environment, see it as the incoming challenge, today's challenge, and apply and utilize your professional careers to confront that challenge. To me, it's not an either or. It's a synthesis of the both of the two. Yeah.
Absolutely. We talked a lot about different pieces of advice, like you said, connecting with community, finding your link to sustainability, whatever field you're in. But if there was one piece of advice, like other than the things that you said so far, if there was one piece of advice that you want to give to a secondary student who's trying to enter the sustainability space, what would that be?
Um, be curious. Read a lot. Um, touch grass.
Yeah.
And also understand that you can't solve the world's problems. It may feel like a heavy burden to you just, especially when you're researching some of the larger issues like deforestation or plastics in our ocean, etc., etc. It can feel very overwhelming, and like don't worry, you're not the savior of the world. You're not going to come and fix all of society's ills, but you can apply again your passion and your interest into and feed that into envisioning and moving towards a sustainable future. So yeah, just be curious, find your interests, and understand this as a much larger issue, and what realm and what space could you operate in, and also collaborate as well. Find who also shares your interest, but maybe has a different skill set, and a different knowledge base from you, and collaborate with them. I wouldn't have the team I have today had I not been open to collaborating with non architects. You know, so there's real strength in diversity of skills and knowledge. So yeah, find your tribe, but don't let it be so monolithic. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Antoinette, for joining me today on this special episode and sharing your thoughts. Thank you to Sustainapod listeners for tuning in this week. We would love to hear about what you think about this episode. So if you have any questions and comments, message us on Instagram at sustainapod_GIH or email us at sustainapod at gmail.com. Until next time, thank you so much.